This whole military, strategic and hard and soft battle between America and China, with Russia doing its own thing as well, is where the world is going to be for the next couple of decades. If Europe wants to play more than a subordinate role in that, it really does need to start putting its money where its mouth is.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots, and today I'm joined by Tim Shipman, the Spectator's political editor, and Tim Marshall, the author and foreign affairs analyst. Now, this big story that's been dominating this weekend was the news that Donald Trump plans to impose 10% tariffs from the 1st of February on a series of countries that have backed Greenland's claim to being independent from American control. Tim, sort of explain what the American thinking is on this.
I think the thing to do is look at a globe rather than look at a map. Everyone seems to be getting very confused that Greenland's this big splodge next to America and Russia's a very long way away. But if you look at a globe, you will see that Greenland, like Iceland, is this massively strategically vital kind of landmass up in the Arctic. It's in the right place. It's sort of between America and Russia. So that's the first point. The second point is there's a load of rare earth minerals there. And the third point is that it would play any kind of important role in, monitoring the incursions of Russian naval activity and all that kind of thing. So it's a place of military significance, and it's a place of financial and sort of mineral significance. The American view is that essentially this needs to be within our kind of security area. It's part of our sort of sphere of influence, and we cannot let this fall into the hands of Russia and China. And were we not to take a more vivid kind of basis of control, then it's possible that those two other countries could do so, and there's not a lot defending it at the moment. The Europeans have come along and sort of got very upset because this is, bluntly, a big brother threatening a territory controlled by a fellow NATO country, and they sent military people there as a kind of, I think it was sort of twofold mission. One, to show America that they couldn't just ride roughshod over an ally, but also to show, yes, we are acknowledging that this perhaps is a place that's of greater strategic significance than we've previously acknowledged. This seems to have acted like a red rag to a bull with Trump, and he's now threatening, tariffs on the countries involved, and saying unless we get a deal that ends with me effectively controlling Greenland, those tariffs are going to be imposed. Now, there's a split also within the US administration. There's people who think Trump should escalate this. Stephen Miller, who has been heavily involved in the Venezuela action and is the Deputy Chief of Staff, and he is, agitating for Trump to go off and do more of this. And then there are people probably on the State Department side, Marco Rubio, some of the other voices in the administration. Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, is in Davos at the moment, fending off the queries of irate Europeans, saying what would be the purpose of causing all our economies misery when we're trying to take on the Chinese. So there's a lot of different wheels within wheels here, but suffice to say, Trump has thrown another of his hand grenades, and at the moment we're still working out who's been hit and whether the Europeans can persuade Trump that he should sort of join their beefing up of Greenland without actually trying to grab its sovereignty.
And Tim Marshall, what is exactly driving Trump's seeming obsession perhaps with Greenland? Because he obviously gone for a really sort of big threat there, 10% tariffs, potentially rising, I think, to 25% if not agreed. What is actually driving his sort of obsession with it?
Megalomania, I think, is the short answer. But the longer answer does, of course, need to be fleshed out a little bit. I agree with Tim Shipman on the strategic importance of Greenland. It is very, very important. It has been for decades, all through the Cold War. It's the shortest route for Russian missiles is over Greenland towards the American East Coast. It's the shortest route for their subs. The problem comes with Trump's stated rationale of why he's taking the measures he's taking, or the threats he's making. And that's because American security is already guaranteed through its base, through the 1951 defense agreement that it has with Greenland and Denmark, They can build more bases if they want. They can have a lot more troops there if they want. They can put more listening posts if they want. They can put all the satellites. It's a very useful place also for the particular surveillance satellites, which go pole to pole, as opposed to communication satellites, which go in different directions. Too technical, sorry. So other than megalomania, it's difficult to see what he's doing. Now, there are I've come up with two potentials. One, it's the precursor to breaking NATO. I doubt that. I think he could be talked out of that. I think that how much it would weaken American defence to be out of NATO. The Fylingdales listening base in Yorkshire, for example, potentially would have to close, probably not. The Ramstein base in Germany, the dozens of bases they have all over Europe. So I doubt that. Okay, so lastly, he's simply trying to bully the Europeans into paying a lot more money and that they pay for most of the defence of Greenland. It could be that, but the whole thing is pretty ludicrous. And I also think it's the beginning of the end of Trump's influence. I think once we get past November and he becomes a lame duck president, I think you will see the sensible Republicans joining forces with the Democrats and begin to sort of say, we've had enough of this.
And all of this, of course, Tim Shipman, we've got the UK's response now. This morning, the Prime Minister gave a press conference in which he said that he wasn't planning to sort of escalate this in terms of having a trade war. He thought it could be resolved through diplomatic measures. There was a suggestion perhaps that he might cancel the King's state visit to America, and he was downplaying all of those suggestions. I mean, really, I suppose the solution which Keir Starmer seems to have sort of alighted upon is the sort of old advice of Harold Macmillan, which is George or not war, war.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And look, I mean, once Trump was threatening Britain and threatening to impose tariffs, the government was unable to sit on the fence any longer. They've, I think Starmer's fairly adeptly kind of navigated a very difficult situation between Trump and between the left wing of his own party that loathes Trump over the last few months. But once you're being threatened yourself, and, Starmer's argument publicly and privately to those MPs has been, look, we are playing nicely with these guys, and broadly we've stayed out of the firing line. Our tariffs on a whole range of things are less than they are for the Europeans, and we've got this tech deal with the Americans, something he was trumpeting a great deal last year. So the argument has been that it's been worth doing this. But once Trump starts targeting you, being the sort of teacher's pet, when the teacher starts chucking board rubbers and wrapping your knuckles with the ruler, cozying up to the teacher doesn't look nearly so much fun. So over the weekend, when all this kicked off, there was a pretty robust briefing from Downing Street about how Starmer had been on the phone to Trump and said that this is wrong, which is, by Starmer's standards, that's pretty hardcore rhetoric. But behind the scenes, Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, is beavering away. He's been involved in several examples of, taking Trump rhetoric and turning it into something lesser and more practical. And I think he will be trying to convince the sort of less radical voices in the US administration that Europe wants to play a role in the defence of Greenland and they should work together on it. I think Tim Marshall's absolutely correct that still underlying this, despite a lot of fire and fury from Trump basically telling the Europeans, you need to step up and look after your own security and you need to pay for it. And he's been saying this since the start of his first term, which is now, quite a long time ago. 9-10 years ago, he's been saying this. And the Europeans, when Trump came in the second time, pledged to whack their defence spending up to 5% over a period of years. But, of course, you can do anything with figures in a national bureaucracy, and none of them is anything like that at the moment, including us, where we're barely scraping 2.6%. And, we're hearing from our own armed forces chiefs that money is not enough to pay even for the strategic defence review that we did a year ago. So while lots of Europeans have acknowledged that they need to look like they're doing something on this, they haven't yet actually started doing it in a lot of cases. The one exception, of course, is the Poles, who've ramped up defence spending spending well over 4%, and it's continuing to rise. But that's because they've got the Russian bear right on their border, and they have a lot of historic memory of what it's like if you don't protect yourselves properly. So, yes, I think this is part of Trump's game, but I think it goes further than that. I think this is very much an ideological bid by certain people in the administration, and of course, Trump ebbs and flows in which bits of his team he supports and which of them he listens to. And at the moment, the slightly more radical side of things is being listened to. But like Tim Marshall, I think that there will be opportunities for this to downscale, and quite a lot of people are in Davos at the moment, all rubbing shoulders, all talking to each other about this. And it wouldn't surprise me by the end of the week if this looks slightly less threatening than it does at the moment.
I mean, Tim Marshall, your response to that, and also just how does this rank in the order of preferences for the United States? Because obviously you've got Ukraine, which has been the big focus of British efforts, and also obviously a lot of activity amassing in Taiwan and the Taiwanese Straits as well. So, I mean, how important would this, and would they be willing to burn down NATO?
I think Greenland is further up the agenda of priorities for the White House, the current White House, than Ukraine is. Second order for them. Tehran's probably going to come back on the radar, but not for at least a week. We've got the USS Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carrier, is currently steaming its way in that direction. So that might come next week. Tim's right to mention Davos. I mean, normally it's just a bit of a talk fest. I don't think it's been that relevant for several years now. But actually, because Trump's going, I think it is this year, because Mark Rutte of NATO is there, all the EU leaders are there, and they will all be doing their bit of Trump whispering, if you like, to try to get this smoothed out. I need to quickly caveat what I said in the first answer about once you get past November, Trump being lamed up. I believe that's true, but also that the sensible Republicans will come together and say we've had enough of this. What I mean by enough of this, I mean his bullying behavior towards allies. I actually think a lot of what he's trying to achieve is quite understandable and correct, including getting the Europeans to grow up, including ourselves, when it comes to defence and the fact that we're in a new era. But that doesn't mean that the overall direction of travel is going to change. I think the Americans of any stripe, Democrat or Republican, are going to keep the pressure on for us to finally get into the 21st century. So a lot will hinge after November on who starts to get the upper hand. Now, Tim mentioned a guy called Stephen Miller. I've got a quote I've pulled up by him. He said this after Venezuela: "We live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world." Now, that's the direction of travel if J.D. Vance comes out on top and is the next president. Marco Rubio is a more traditional Republican. The Democrats would go back to the more traditional tone of doing things. But this is where a lot of people, I think, mistake Trump's belligerence as a one-off. The direction of travel that the Americans are going in, I don't think's going to change.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, to be honest. And I think there's a lot of wishful thinking in London and in some of these other European capitals that Trump is this great aberration that is going to go away. And there are sensible people around Keir Starmer who don't believe that, who think that this is the start of a very clear strategic shift by the Americans. And Morgan McSweeney, the chief of staff, has been very clear with his colleagues that this ain't going away. We're going to be living with this for decades. This is a different approach, and as Tim Marshall says, just because Trump does everything belligerently and unpleasantly doesn't mean what he's doing is either wrong or daft a lot of the time. And I think Europe needs to wake up to the fact that the tectonic plates internationally are shifting, and we are going from a fairly unipolar world into a multipolar world, and there will be spheres of influence, and Europe will desperately hope that it can be one of them. But it looks, if you follow Stephen Miller's rationale, which really is only the realpolitik rationale of Britain in the 19th century, of Bismarck, of Cavour, of, Pitt the Younger and Napoleon. It's all the same game, essentially, which is that, great powers will seek advantage. You have at least America and China. Russia clearly sort of punches above its economic weight in terms of its military and strategic kind of desire to get involved and to have a sphere of influence. Europe desperately wants to have its own, but it may realise that without the military capability, without the hard power, you can have as much soft power as you want, but it doesn't actually get you anywhere. And they will have to navigate between these three other blocks. Economically, clearly, they have way more clout than Russia does, but they don't compare with China. And America is the kind of sweet spot between the two, really. China hasn't yet been that militarily assertive. It's bought up lots of the world. It's supplied roads and buildings in exchange for large chunks of owning, sort of significant chunks of a lot of countries around the world. It hasn't yet gone round doing a lot of invading and grabbing land, and it may be that America, backs off into stylistically, but I think Tim Marshall's right. They're not going to, this whole sort of military, strategic, and hard and soft battle between America and China, with Russia doing its own thing as well, is where the world is going to be for the next couple of decades. And if Europe wants to play more than a subordinate role in that, it really does need to start putting its money where its mouth is.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. And thank you for listening to Coffee House Shots.